your view, let's forget about Mr. Madiba now. Your view is that once the chairperson said you should not be dismissed, the public protector had no choice in the matter, correct?
Yes, correct. Depending on the policy at the time.
Yes, the policy, well, we know the policy at the time. Your view is that according to the policy at the time, the public protector had no choice in the verdict of the chairperson, correct?
Correct.
And that policy, that's why it's called a policy, because it applies across the board, would also apply to Mr. Madiba, correct?
Correct.
Sure. So please don't then, you can't say then he was dismissed by the public protector, because according to you, she had no choice in the matter. But that's not even what I was asking you. I'm saying to you, discretion or not discretion, whatever, recommendation or no recommendation, as a matter of fairness, is it fair that Mr. Madiba, who reported to you, gets dismissed for a collective misdemeanor that you have, or misconduct that you have committed together with him, but you must go back to work? In other words, in this whole equation, everyone except you must be dismissed. Mr. Madiba is dismissed, public protector must be impeached, but you must go back to work. Is that fair?
Chairperson, I have already responded to this question. I think I responded to this question 3 times. Yeah. And my response was that I cannot be held accountable for the decisions that were taken by the public protector. So, and the fact that Mr. Madiba was dismissed, I raised my issues about that yesterday. I cannot comment on this question. I was dealing with my own decision. So I feel that it's unfair to expect me to try and take accountability for the decisions that should be that was taken by the public protector. The public protector will deal with those when it's her time to respond.
Okay, well, for the record, nobody said you must take responsibility for anything. I'm also saying that for the 3rd time, but that's fine. You're saying that Mr. Madiba should have been spared from these responsibilities because of his health situation, correct?
Correct.
And you were the boss. Why did you not do that?
I'm talking about the situations, the decisions that they were not within my powers. I'm talking about the support to Mr. Madiba. When I took over from the time that I was in the branch up until we were suspended, I reduced Mr. Madiba's workload. I even engaged with the CEO and with HR in terms of how we support Mr. Madiba. And we continue to support him. And my point was raised prior to the period that I joined the branch, and also around the decision to suspend him and the manner in which his disciplinary matter was handled. So yes. I was the boss in the unit, but I was not in charge of the disciplinary process.
Yes. Okay. Now, as a person who's obviously more compassionate than anybody else, did you say that in this pressured situation, Mr. Madiba is cannot be expected to work under this tremendous amount of pressure? Maybe he should be medically boarded or something like that, so that nobody would be asking him for deadlines and things like that. Did you ever do that as his boss?
I did, but the decision for him to be medically boarded, it's a decision that he must take. But I did. I engaged, as I stated, we had discussions with HR. So I did.
Good. And so while he was still working, was it unreasonable also to expect him to deliver on the work that he was being paid for?
Look, the provisions of the law are very clear that there should have been reasonable accommodation. So for Madiba, you can't, it was unreasonable to expect the deadlines as if Mr. Madiba was not sick. The minute that he became sick, the expectations should have changed.
And the fact that when he put himself on when he was put on a 6-week deadline that then went over to almost 5 or 6 months, you don't think that he was being accommodated?
Look, reasonable accommodation must be relative to either the illness or the disability of the employee. So if you increase the timeline to 6 months, but you still expect him to deliver like any other person, you don't put measures in place to support him. For me, it's not sufficient reasonable accommodation. Let's say, for instance, whether you give Mr. Madiba 5 or 6 months, the fact that he could only use one hand, but you expect him to draft a report where he has to lift files and he cannot do that, he cannot page. If he has to page, it means that he must stop using typing on the computer. So you need to, it needs to be reasonable taking into consideration, and there need to be a very clear plan to support him.
So in your view, then, basically he should not have been working in that pressurized environment at all, correct?
Correct.
And he, as you correctly point out, he chose to work in that environment for that period. I mean, when I say chose, I know I'm not undermining the economic factors that might have played into that decision. But he was placed in a position where he was in charge of certain investigations which are important to the public, correct?
He didn't choose, he had no option.
Yes, and the employer also then had no option but to expect him to deliver on the deliverables once he was in that position, correct?
No, the employer, I don't agree that the employer was expected. The employer had a duty in terms of the Labor Relations Act to reasonably accommodate Mr. Madiba based on his medical condition.
Thank you.
By doing what? By not expecting any deliverables from him?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
On that note, we've just been reminded by Sanfran from YouTube, and he's calling for tea. I oblige. We'll break for tea for 15 minutes. We'll be back at quarter. Thank you, Advocate Mbofu and Ms. Mogaladi.
Next time I have an
Recording
objection, I'll send it via YouTube. Thanks, Chairperson.